Chris Sidoti here said that Israel must end its genocide in Gaza, but Australia must act too, and rabbits on about genocide, genocide, genocide. We've got obligations, must do this, must do that. All right, this guy, part of the committee response from the UN. So no wonder. Okay, the United Nations Commission of Inquiry in the Occupied Palestine Territory, on which I was one of the commissioners, released its report on Israel's genocide in its military ops in Gaza. Okay. Now, the reason I was late starting today was because I actually went and read the UN report just to get a better understanding of what it was and why it was they were declaring it a genocide. Now, they very briefly hand wave away the fact that the initial start of things was that it was the result of war crimes. Okay? So the whole thing started with a series of war crimes. They then go to say that the Israeli response amounts to genocide. Okay. Now they're sort of hand waving and pointing, and some of the justification they put in it is tenuous at best, but he's demanding that Australia ceases all trade with Australia and Israel, that we close the trade and defence office in Jerusalem, further sanctions against individuals, prosecute Australian citizens who've served in the IDF for genocide, war crimes, or crimes against humanity. Careful about the path you walk down, because, like I just said when we were talking about Ukraine, there was a very clear example of a war crime carried out by Ukraine under the auspices of perfidy. Now, if we have Australian citizens providing service to the Ukrainian military, this same argument can be used against them for prosecution for war crimes and crimes against humanity. This guy has got his blinkers on Palestine, but is probably not being very, probably expecting, oh no, people will never chase it down for Ukraine. It's and then he's pushing this same thing of prohibiting Australian citizens from fighting in the armed forces of foreign states, again, largely targeting Israel. Prohibiting final transactions with Israeli settlements, end tax deductibility for charities, all orders and decisions of international courts relating to this violence. I went and read the report. It is one-sided, and I understand why Israel would reject it. And the report is very selective of when it starts and what it continues on. Now, there are claims raised in the report about the degree of genocide that aren't necessarily supported by alternate reporting sources that you can go and look up online yourself that have actual video footage from within Gaza. It also highlights some things about, okay, it puts Israel in an odd position whereby it is an armed belligerent in trying to retrieve its hostages, and it is also expected to provide humanitarian aid, even though it's not an occupied territory. It is expected to feed, water, and everything else to the population. And it's like it's got to resupply the people it's fighting. And the Israelis created a document at some point investigating what the amount of daily calories they needed to supply to the population in Gaza to be above malnutrition, which this group decided meant that it was an attempt to starve the population of Gaza. Well, you could look at it that way, or you could look at it as it's a document by the people who apparently also have the obligation of supplying humanitarian aid to ensure that that there is a minimum they should not go below. That in order to preserve life, they're not about giving luxury, but there is an absolute minimum they should not be providing less than, or else it will result in malnutrition and starvation within Gaza. And so you can paint it in both ways. And quite obviously, the commission decided that it was an article of genocide. So I looked at the population, I looked at the deaths allocated and expected and things like that. Now, some of the claims they say for reproductive harm and damage to suppression of future population is because IVF services got hit or reproductive services got hit. And it's like, okay, you've got to show intent that that was the reason why they were hit. You're not showing that. You're just showing that they were hit. The commission also does not explain whether or not the targets that were hit that they claim were completely civilian, where the military targets were. Their positioning seems to be that the entire Gaza Strip is entirely civilian. When, well, they conducted war crimes, so somebody somewhere in there is a combatant. But the report doesn't allow for that. It doesn't allow for historic incidents of Hamas tunnels and buried command centers that would have been underneath or closely associated with civilian assets. And they rightly point out the density of population in the Gaza Strip, 6,300 people plus per square kilometre. Well, it's going to be awfully hard to separate military from civilian targets in a density like that, particularly if the military assets are buried. Now, what if Hamas had returned all the hostages on day 2? Would Israel still be continued in this? I don't know. I mean, the public statement is that they're there to get their hostages back and now to destroy Hamas. The Commission also ignores the stated position of Hamas and what would have been Palestinian Authority, Liberation Organization before it. The whole statement from the river to the sea is a genocidal statement. Its goal is to eradicate the Israeli people from the Jordanian River to the Mediterranean Sea. Its stated goal is to remove them, force them out of the area, or if not, to kill them. And yet that is not seen as a genocidal statement or an attempt. Now, obviously, they're far less equipped than the Israeli military, so it's very much an asymmetric conflict. But you can't look at one side in exclusion like that. And then when you talk about, well, you've got to absolve yourself of supporting genocidal statements and impose sanctions. If we're being honest, and we should be honest, then the next pro-Palestinian protest that goes on should be jailed. Everyone should be jailed and prosecuted for supporting genocide. Because the moment you utter from the river to the sea, you are advocating the eradication of a people. Now, there is talk of in that report of Israel using non-precision guided munitions. Well, even with precision guided munitions, you're going to cop a lot of casualties. Looking at even the high-end estimate of casualties that are provided in the report and in other sources online, on the order of 2% of the Gaza population has been killed as a result of the conflict in the last 2 years. And that is genocide. Now, again, you want to minimize casualties and civilian deaths and things like that. the raw number of deaths is far less than what was in Syria or Iraq. It's close to what it was in Afghanistan. But the difference being, well, the pre-conflict the population was smaller than those other three nations, and just straight up civilian deaths should be avoided wherever possible. The fact that there is still belligerence from both sides. Israel's still trying to get their remaining hostages back, alive or dead, and Hamas isn't giving them back. Now, the other part of it too is if you want to look before October 7, 2023, and look at how Hamas ran the Gaza Strip, you could argue that they were being genocidal, not just in their approach to the Israeli state, to the state of Israel, but also to people of various secular beliefs within the Gaza Strip, and how they basically killed most people who opposed them. There were plenty of examples of executions of people who were alleged to have been Israeli spies, but by and large they eradicated the Palestinian Authority representatives, they eradicated people of different faiths, they killed their way through the Gaza Strip to consolidate power and then bury themselves underground in terms of where they keep their power structures. As was seen in Lebanon, where it took some rather serious strikes to hit command centers that were buried quite a long way underground. When the entire zone is covered in civilian buildings, but you're still trying to strike and take out the command structures, there is, sadly, collateral. It shouldn't be considered collateral. I mean, it's like I said, it's understandable why the Israelis are not committing to it, and why they perceive this recent release report as biased, and these demands that this individual is making, again, go back to the statements I've made before. Be careful of what you ask for, because one day it'll be used against you. And there are plenty of examples of protests and everything else going on in other places where this will come back and bite people in the backside. Very much so. Right. Yeah. Trust me, reading that report was not fun. Not fun.